I'd like to introduce our Master of Ceremonies for the afternoon, the Honorable Jeffrey K. Harris. He is the Chairman of the Board of the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation, and he needs no further introduction. Mr. Harris.
Darrell, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you to all of you for joining us for GEOINT Foreword. First and foremost, USGIF is an educational foundation, and we began GEOINT Foreword several years ago in order to get sort of the right next conversation to take place. And this next conversation depends an awful lot on the right piece of technology, meeting the right kind of people, infusing itself into the right process. And we'll spend a lot of time this afternoon with Steve Roberts, who is at the bleeding edge of the stick, talking about how do we think about problems differently and how do we infuse that thinking and delivery of a process differently within the context that we all have to survive. I thought the breakout of today's session was phenomenal. We had some subject matter experts on stage that infused to us, here's some of the stuff they're wrestling with, and instead of hearing from them sort of again, they brought their lieutenants in to speak where we didn't have to move, and we moved in a smaller venue through some very speed dating kind of algorithm. The observations that I made were Gary Denau talking about getting involved. This is a team sport. It's a team sport where we're focused on technology. It's the fusing of arts and science. It's combining these things. I was arguing with some of our university colleagues following this morning's presentation. Do we still have quite the right bullets around Gary's chart in terms of how do we approach problems differently as we recombine some of these elements, these ingredients? I thought Lon Harmon, speaking to the rate of change, I've been a member of large bureaucracies most of my life as a government employee and a big airspace corporation. I've had a couple times to lead smaller organizations as well. And if you become a student of bureaucracy, you understand that the first rule of every bureaucracy is to resist change at all costs, because if nature abhors a vacuum, bureaucracies abhor change. And so what's refreshing about today's conversation is we are running towards that light that represents change. And it was a recognition by Lon that location-based services are a reality that the whole world has fallen in love with. And it's a business that we in the GEOINT community began and is now being enabled by simple things like social media and everything becoming location aware. And you fast forward to the Internet of Things, where all of the things are location aware, talking to all of the operators that are location aware. As Lon correctly pointed out, the vertically integrated stovepipes become liabilities because the data will move horizontally at huge speeds, and good enough sort of wins. I sat on a board with a good friend who was the chief administrative officer for the Eastman Kodak Company, and we were having lunch one day, and I said, can you get sort of the Eastman Kodak story down to one sentence? He goes, yeah. With respect to the bankruptcy, we saw it coming. We didn't see it coming quite so quickly. And so a lot of the speakers today spoke to the speed at which this and the need to embrace this change, even though we're all members of some bureaucracy. What I find interesting in our conversation, and this is sort of a recurring theme of mine, is that we used to say plug and play was easy to say, hard to do. It was repeated again on stage. We now like to talk about interdependent and interoperable. Now, what's interesting about interdependent is if Steve and I are going to be interdependent in some kind of an operation, I have a dependency on him that I may not be able to execute my mission unless he executes nearly perfectly that dependency. If I don't carry a spare tire in my car, but I travel within a 50-mile radius of home, my dependency can be it's a cold, rainy night, and I can call Steve and says, I have a flat, would you come fix it? And if that dependency is well stated, he gets dressed, hops in his car, comes, changes my flat, and on my side of the dependency, I return some similar favor. Interoperable will be that he has to bring a tire that fits on my car, and we ought to probably rehearse that a little bit before it happens, because as I scale in complexity and I scale in speed, these are important things to take place. So the fact that I'm going to take new tradecraft and combine it with data in this interdependent and interoperable environment and have it to work within this bureaucratic structure of extant policy and legal, it is one of the reasons we're now meeting, starting our second decade of GEOINT. Although we have made these huge steps forward, there's still much work to remain because of all of the knobs that we're simultaneously turning on what's happening in open source, civil, government, commercial, industry, all of these different heretofore verticals coming together in different environments. Daniela Moody, when she spoke, it sounded for a second like an AA conference where she said, I am an analyst and I work with data. I was having a meeting with a woman who was graduated first in her class from the U.S. Air Force Academy, who was serving New Mexico as a representative in Congress, who was on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And Heather Wilson said to me one night at a reception, she said, what is it about government employees that when they have a data set, the last thing, this is some time ago, the last thing they want to do is share that data set? And she said, when you become a government employee, don't you sort of say, I'm going to work for this greater good, and I don't have the profit motive that's the same of competimates in an industrial environment. Why do people hold the thing that's most shareable most dearly? And it's back to my first rule of bureaucracy, or the second word you learn as a young child. The first word is arguably mama, and the second word is mine. And that connection with ownership, but Daniela admitting that she works with data, that we admit that it wants to be interdependent and interoperable, and that we now want to understand, model, and predict, allows us to imagine what we're going to go do machine to machine, how the machines are going to help us visualize, how we're going to allow the analysts to scale, because as I discuss all of this with the seniors, we now clearly recognize the complexity of the problems we face force us to operate at a different scale, using new sensors, new phenomenology, new understanding. And so in today's show daily, the Stan McChrystal article I'd like you to read, and he's talking about what he learned at the JSOC and how all of this fits together. And what he's learned that the command and control system of the military of 1850 is dramatically changing as the organization flattens out. And so the buck slip, where we'd have one copy of this and I'd staple a buck slip on it and we'd send it around and people to initial it as they've read it, the 2-week process to send it through an organization is long gone. And the speed of information is changing this dynamic within the organization, because the technology is so enabling, the people are embracing the technology, and we're now figuring out how to create these new ecosystems to respond. Our ability to close the interface between government and industry is important. In the last year, I commend to you this book that USGIF put together. It is very readable at 27-ish pages. we intend to do it every year, where we can describe what's hot, what's not hot, and what's on the horizon, which is our voice as the technologists to speak about how this ecosystem's going to be disrupted by us, and how the stuff that used to be hard is easy, and the stuff that is still hard will be easier. I am excited about the opportunity that all of this puts together. So this week, while you're here, you participate in GEOINT Foreword. We have about 80 hours of continuing ed credits that are available for professional training that are offered by our member organizations to people. And one of the things that we noticed is that sold out about as quickly as GEOINT Foreword sold out, where there is huge demand to understand some of these cutting edge things, and the offerers of these capabilities, working with the management team, figured out how to shoehorn more people into the venues that'll take place starting tomorrow. Daryl mentioned what we're doing with the universities, what we're doing with universal professional certification, and how we can all become sort of badged people that are celebrating our contribution to this larger system. In one of the breakout sessions, we talked a little bit about how cultures have to change as you add GEOINT into it. And all of us here are sort of on that pointing edge of the stick for understanding what the technology innovation wants to take place. So again, in this report, we're not trying to predict the future, but we're trying to, I think, probably better anticipate the future. So when I grew up to become the director of the National Reconnaissance Office, I used to marvel at the inventiveness of Americans to take sort of, pun intended, galactically hard problems and reduce it to practice so we could put it on the top of a rocket, launch it into space, and typically have pretty successful missions, solving some of the hardest problems for the US and its allies. As you move forward now, we see the strength of the worldwide industrial might coming together, focused on the R&D. So now it's a little bit like a Chinese menu where you get to mix and match, which again highlights my siren song for interdependent and interoperable. So as I shift gears, I mean, the theme for the conference is opening the aperture, charting new paths. And we have a keynote this afternoon that has worked for the United States Air Force, has gone off to form his own company, has made a huge step forward in early cancer detection, has 100-some patents to his name, and is probably the right person at the right place in order to be at the Air Force Research Laboratory and helping them understand and embrace the technological change that's coming, because the tech base of industry combined with the mission tech space of the government does have to come together. And Steve graciously hosted USGIF at AFRL a few months ago. There's a lot of people who were very engaged in conversation with him to understand how sensing as a service will come to reality as he takes his vision and knocks down some of the implementation barriers. So Steve, we are very pleased that you could join us this morning, or this afternoon now, and share your insights with us here at GEOINT 2015.
So my name is Steve Rogers. If you're not a Marvel Comics fan, that's the secret identity of Captain America. If you back up one slide, you can, yeah, it's not that important, I get. If you might have recognized the superhuman physique, but in my day job, I serve as the Air Force's principal scientific authority for automatic target recognition and sensor fusion. And so If you look at what we do and its relevance to you, I'm going to sort of take you down this path. We have this vision of the future of the enterprise, and I'm going to use one of our recent documents, Sensing as a Service, to sort of give you a view of where we think ISR is going, and GEOINT also. We're going to drive home that to achieve that future, we're going to need some major technology breakthroughs, and specifically people throw around terms like autonomy. And so I want to spend a little time talking about autonomy, how we should be discussing it, and our unique approach to trying to achieve autonomous systems, specifically for ISR. And then eventually I'm going to take you over to, assuming you guys out there are developing breakthroughs, how do we know that they actually improve our mission capability? And that's this effort called PCPAD-X. So that's sort of the trajectory we're going to go. So let's start with Sensing as a Service. What we realized was we have these high-level vision documents written by the 3 and 4 stars where they sort of articulate, here's what the future will look like. And in those documents, the statements are so broad that anybody down there in the laboratories actually doing work could do anything and say, this is going to lead to that future. And what we really needed was a little more actionable guidance. So we started writing these series of documents called ISR Horizons. One of those documents is Sensing as a Service. What Sensing as a Service addresses is basically this challenge. What we have today is if somebody needs some information which is going to impact a decision, we go arrange a collection, we put a bunch of analysis on that collection, and we deliver a product. That linear relationship between the collection and the analysis and the product doesn't scale, and it's not very agile. We know to get to where we need to get to, we have to figure out a way around that. Sensing as a Service is meant to address that issue. Now, most people are familiar with service-based products, you know, Google, et cetera, Amazon. Service-based analysis, that's okay. But most people don't understand this difference, and I'm using this term very carefully, sensing versus sensors. A lot of people in the Pentagon will say, we don't need any new sensors. And what they're really saying is, what we really got to figure out is how to bring information, which is where you guys add the magic sauce. So if you just look at the definitions, a sensor just brings something into band for some agent to process, whether that's a computer or a person, it doesn't really matter. Sensing, on the other hand, it takes not only the information in, but it understands it, it experiences it. What does it mean? So when we articulated Sensing as a Service, we're trying to drive together 2 very important concepts. The idea of sensing, not just the gathering of observables, but figuring out what they mean, and figure out how to best use that to impact lots of decisions. So Sensing as a Service does that. Now the way these documents work is, they're 3 to 5 pages and linked, really easy to read, A distribution, you can pull them off the internet. Sensing as a Service is defined by a set of tenets. These are the actionable characteristics of that future state which we're envisioning, Sensing as a Service. I'll talk to you about 2 of them in a little more detail, but the first one, the idea on a closed-loop decision system is that just like a seeker in an air-to-air missile by itself doesn't give you the effect, the combat effect you need. It's the seeker in conjunction with the amount of the munition along with the command and control, which achieves some effect, like get your enemy and blow him out of the sky. We have to take the same mentality in our business. It isn't the capturing of the data. It isn't even the analysis of the data. It's when you can impact the decision and you use that system of systems approach to figure out how to change. Sensing as a Service requires that. It's got to be multimodal. That's the third and fourth tenet. You have to make sense of the information while you're gathering it, because you have to change what you gather and how you process it on the fly. You can't just throw it over the fence and assume that more magic is added along the way. Multi-user support. And now there's 2 other tenets which I'm going to spend a little more time on. The first one is assessment. Any Sensing as a Service solution has to be objectively assessed. Now what that means in our business is not does the tool function properly, not does the sensor gather, does the physics work, but in fact, when you give it to a user in an operational environment, does it improve mission capability? So objective, not only functional, but user assessment in mission environments. Sensing as a Service solutions require that. This is one of the key characteristics of PCPAD-X, which is where we're going to end up today. Another tenet which I skipped over, but is the key for this next part of the talk is, Sensing as a Service solutions require what we term responsive sensing automation. By responsive sensing automation, we're talking about the ability of, while you're gathering the observables and you're processing them, you have some understanding. That is, the sensor, the processor has some understanding of how these things are going to be used. And thus you can imagine sensing systems which change fields of use and maybe even modes of collection based on the streaming analysis of the data. But when we start throwing around these terms like automation, we got to figure out how to get to them. Now, I got to remind you, sensing as a service is just one of a whole bunch of documents that we've been writing which articulate this future. I've listed some of them here for you. And again, some of them are done and available on the net. Others we're just working on. For example, the integrated ISR and operations document is being written right now. These documents universally have this problem of we're assuming major technology breakthroughs by you guys, okay? And so we need to talk about that. What do we mean by automation? What do we mean by autonomy? So that's the first part of the talk. You made it through that okay. Sensing as a service says we're going to have this future where we're not going to have this linear relationship. You can look at your jobs as generating information spheres where lots of users can interact with your products, not the single user that you might have thought you were going to do. You're going to have to generate your information in a way that can be used by many people doing things that you can't even imagine what they're doing, okay? That's the sensing as a service idea. Now what we want to talk about is to achieve that, you're going to need a whole nother set of technology tools, and that's where people start using the words like autonomy. So let's sort of clean up some vernacular here, some terms. When I use the word autonomy, I like to differentiate it between automatic and automated, okay? When you think of automatic, it's just reflexive. It doesn't mean it's trivial, it just means a stimulus causes a response. Think of tapping your patella tendon and your knee flexes, okay? Think of that PowerPoint or that Excel file. You put them in a particular mode, you give it a stimulus, and it does exactly what you've programmed it to do, just reflexive responses. That's automatic. In the GEOINT business, automated says, I might require a little more operational environmental knowledge to do what you want me to do. Think of a tracker. I think of tracking or even automatic target recognition where I make my living. You know, those things require a little more computational intelligence, so I'm going to put automated into that bucket, okay? You know, trackers require a little more robustness. They adapt somewhat to the environmental conditions. But then you got autonomy. Autonomy is a whole nother game. And we're going to really take some time and try to figure out what that means. And the reason we have to figure out what it means is, tomorrow morning I think you have DepSecDef, the Honorable Mr. Work talking. He loves to talk about the third offset strategy. And what that requires is that we have these breakthroughs so that our technological superiority allows us to win wars. And every place through those documents you see autonomy, autonomy, autonomy. And what I mean by that term is, as an engineer, I'm a geek by trade, I'm a machine learning geek by trade, is you give me a bunch of data, I know how to wire up a system that does what we like to call data-driven artificial intelligence. And if the world doesn't change, I win, okay? I can do that. The problem I have in engineering systems is when I get what I like to call the unexpected query. That input, that request that I've never seen before and I wasn't able to model. I wasn't able to design in a response for that. That's the unexpected query. That's where autonomy comes in. How do we resolve those unexpected queries? So even though I'm talking autonomy, I gotta drive home the fact we do not envision any time in the foreseeable future just replacing the people. The people are the most valuable resource we have. I do not know how to engineer replacements doing a lot of the tasks that I need to do. And the state of the art, this is a great example of the state of the art. Once Gary Kasparov got beat by Deep Blue, many people thought, okay, game up. The best chess playing in the world is done by computers. But then playchess.com had a competition and said, what if we just open this thing up and let anybody, any teams play, groups of people, groups of computers, groups of people and computers, and let them all compete. Who wins? What everybody thought would happen was that some grand champion team with a supercomputer would win. And early in the competition, that's exactly the way it was playing out. But at the end of the day, a couple of mid-ranked chess players, not even grandmasters, using 3 laptops won. What the heck happened there? Well, Gary Kasparov, the world's best chess player, analyzed every match and made this little conclusion on the bottom. And for the people in the cheap seats in the back, let me read it for you. It says it isn't always the best technology. It isn't always the best human in terms of knowledge. If you have an incorrect process by which you're bringing those together, you lose. We keep learning that lesson in our war fighting. We throw really well-trained people with really good technologies, but we don't match them correctly with the battle spaces we're in. If we're going to throw autonomy into this fight, we got to figure out how to reduce that impedance in that human-computer teaming. So let's talk about a couple of examples of where autonomy impacts decision-making so we can sort of tease out how to do this right and how to do this wrong. And as Jeff said, I spent a decade. I was just getting out of the military. I spent 20 years in the Air Force. And my mother had come down with breast cancer. And I was worried about, how does this even work? How do you detect breast cancer? And I went down to North Carolina and I met with a radiologist. And this lady took a piece of film. This was in the early 90s. And the state of medical care was, film, not unlike what our business used to be. And threw it up on a backlit box and pulled out a magnifying glass. That was the standard of care. And she pointed out to me, here's the signs of breast cancer, okay? Now, that just flabbergasted me. I had just spent 20 years in the military doing smart weapons, and we were using magnifying glasses on backlit film. Well, the world has changed, but basically it hasn't changed much. Humans are still required to look for these very subtle, low-contrast signs of breast cancer. And is the volume of the number of pixels, is the variety of the cancer signals so much that humans will never be that good at doing this, okay? In fact, you can show that 30% of the cancers, which are actually evident visibly on the mammograms, are missed by those humans. Okay, that's an opportunity where maybe our technology can help. And in fact, you can develop systems, and we develop systems, where you can automatically go find cancers. Now, we have false positives. Everybody in the GEOINT business understands sometimes the technology works and sometimes it doesn't. So what you have to do is you have to figure out what is the appropriate command and control relationship between the technology and the human trying to do this task. So it turns out that in breast cancer detection, you have some signatures which are these local, very small clusters of microcalcifications. Computers are excellent at finding those. Okay? Humans hate doing that because you have to look at the highest resolution over all the images. Right? Computers are great. Over 99% accurate with less than one false positive on a 4-film case. Just spectacular. So I can imagine being a human radiologist, given that computer my proxy to find those signatures. On the other hand, to find masses, things like spiculated lesions or asymmetric densities, computers have a little more false positive issues on those because the variety of those signatures are so much, humans are much better at that. Okay, so now the human command and control relationship with a computer-aided detection of breast cancer might be, I'm just going to let you look for those, tell me where you think it might be, but I'm not taking your word on all of them. Okay, so this command and control relationship between the technology and the human is key, and which task you're doing, calcs or densities, key. Okay, and then the amount of computational complexity, key. Now, anytime I talk about autonomy, somebody's going to throw up, how about the Google car? Isn't that autonomous? Now, again, let's look at the state of the art. I gave you the state of the art in breast cancer detection. What is the state of the art in autonomous cars? There is no place the Google car drives that hasn't been driven over multiple times with sensor gathering equipment, and that data is processed, excruciatingly processed, a lot by humans, so everything is known about where this car is driving. It can't drive if the meteorological conditions are something it hasn't experienced, like snow. It can't go on roads that haven't had this intelligence preparation of the battle space, okay? Now, it is coming, but where you're going to see it is, again, not unlike calcs and densities, in very specific tasks, like super cruise. There'll be cars out there which allow you to get on the highway and turn it loose, okay? There'll be cars which take over the mundane task of driving in DC when you're in gridlock, that little stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. Those sorts of things are very specific tasks within the area of autonomous cars. And why would you do it? Well, the amount of wrecks you have when humans do it. Okay, there may be a need for it in this space. So again, you have to have the need, you have to figure out what the task is, and then you can figure out, is the data sufficient enough to support the current state of autonomous solutions? All right, so how about our business in ISR? In our business, I mean, this just lists some of the things we're facing on a daily basis. You know, the diversity of these tasks means that we quite often throw together ad hoc combinations of sensors and people and resources to find information that we need to respond to a whole set of users. To give you an idea of the state of the art in this space, I'm going to show you one example. So you have some remotely piloted vehicle gathering high-resolution, full-motion video over some permissive environment, meaning we own the skies. What do we do with that data to generate products? We throw a bunch of people at it. This is a full-motion video processing cell, and you can see the number of people. I have young airmen, not unlike these kids that are out here showing these posters, okay, the FMV analysts. They are ordered. You stare at that screen, okay? You call out anything you see. And if you need to turn your eyes for any reason, you need to sneeze or anything else, you better ask permission, because somebody else has got to put their eyes on that screen. And they're calling out, and you got the guy in the middle, the screener, who's typing in what they're saying. And then you got your GEOINT person who's bringing a little more context to the products, and then a multi-source analyst and a mission ops commander, et cetera. But the point I'm driving home to you is the state of the art in our business when we have data like this is people. Throwing the people at the problem. I'm going to return to this later on how you might apply some tools to help this. So when you talk about autonomy, I want you to think about these three axes. There's a command and control relationship between the human and the engine. There's a task. We probably won't be talking about autonomous systems. We're talking about autonomy with respect to a task, with respect to a particular human-computer relationship. And the third is the computational complexity to do the task. Again, keep in mind my automated autonomy breakout. When I get to autonomy, I'm worried about that unexpected query. What's required for that unexpected query? So given this sort of breakout of autonomy, we can look at the tasks we talked about and say, what would autonomous solutions look at in any of those space, whether it's driving the cars, or whether it's finding the cancers, or whether it's doing an FMV analysis, or any of the GEOINT analysis problems. What does autonomy look like in those spaces? Well, we know exactly what it looks like, because we have people doing those now. I mean, I, in some sense, gave my proxy to the taxi driver last night coming in from Reagan. Okay, I didn't tell him which way to go. I didn't tell him, how fast to go. I gave him my proxy. I sort of gave the command and control relationship between me and that taxi driver. If you look at humans doing tasks and you ask, how do they do it? When do they fail? And why do they fail? You get some interesting results. This is a slide I got from the former chief scientist of the Air Force. And when she did analysis of failures in human decision-making, autonomous human decision-making, if you will, in aviation environments, she came up with the reason for the failure is because lack of situation awareness. And what she meant by that is either we didn't give that person the information they needed, or even if we got them the information they needed, they didn't understand it. Or even if they got the information and they understand it, they couldn't use it to put it into a projection and figure out what was going to happen next. Those are the levels, the Inslee levels of situation awareness. So what is contended is if you want to make autonomy functional and the response is acceptable, you need to increase situation awareness. Okay? That's sort of the going in position. Now what's sort of interesting to me about this situation awareness taxonomy to improve performance of autonomy is that third stage, the projection stage, figuring out what's going to happen next based on your understanding of what you currently have available to you. What I find interesting about that projection stage is it's not sensor data populated, okay? It's an imagined representation. What might happen next? And when you think about this imagination, this idea of projecting into the future, what is it? When you and I imagine, I mean, before I came over here today, I imagined a room. Okay? And what is that? It's an all-source situated representation of prior talks I've given. And so you sort of have, and then I walk in here and I sort of populate it with some real sensory data, and I have this representation. But this imagined representation, it seems to be key to be able to do projection, and seems to be key to autonomy. So I have to ask the question, what sort of processing engine can generate an imagined representation? And so to do that, I need to sort of give you some terms. Because you guys, God bless you. You try to add rigor to the analysis you do, so you try to define terms like data and information and knowledge and wisdom, and I really appreciate you doing that. So but as I use those terms, I want to show you the way I'm using them. So give me this agent. Now it could be a computer or person, I don't care. The blue box there is an agent. An agent is defined by it has some sensors, which can take in some stimuli from the environment. And those sensors, when it gathers the observables associated with the stimuli, once that gets inside the agent, I'm going to call that data. So don't ever, when you're talking to me, use the word data unless you're telling me what agent it's with respect to. Data isn't out there, because once I've made the capture with my sensors, that sensor did something to that observable. It did some processing on it. It did some, it only looked in certain locations, in certain modalities. Don't say data as if it's out there. I'm go gathering data. No, I've gathered these stimuli and now it's data. Once it's internal to my agent, I use some knowledge to reduce some uncertainty to my representation. That's information. Information is the reduction in the uncertainty of the representation of some agent. So again, don't say information without saying with respect to what agent, because any agent's model will determine what's information for it. And once you have that information, you can use your knowledge to decide what to do about it. So then you can put some stimuli back out into the space. Now, I'm going to use the term query to imply this whole process of stimuli being captured and a response being generated. As a designing engineer, what I'm after is designing my agents so they can respond to a whole range of queries appropriately, acceptably. Now, when I hit those queries that I didn't expect, that unexpected query, that's when I run into difficulty. That unexpected query is what we need for autonomy. And this is the space I use to talk about unexpected query. The horizontal axis is the amount of awareness, the amount of knowledge you have on the environment. So as I go further and further to the right on this graph, okay, that is more and more knowledge about the environment. The vertical axis is in fact, do I have a mental model that can account for that state of the environment which I have knowledge of? That upper right green part is the sweet spot for automation. If I can measure everything I need to measure, and I've designed in a response for that associated state of the environment, that's automation. I win. Those are the expected queries. To do autonomy, I've got to be able to handle when I don't have all the information which I need, or I don't have the right mental model. Okay? That's what we have to push on to achieve autonomy, those two axes. I'll give you some examples. So for example, in my breast cancer business, we spent literally millions of dollars going out and gathering tens of thousands of mammogram cases. And then we programmed computers in a sort of data-driven artificial intelligence approach to find cancers and say what they were. When I took that product and put it over into Asia, that's an unexpected query. Breasts are completely different in Asia. You have smaller, denser breasts in Asia as a general rule. And so now even though the models were right, the signatures of cancer are virtually identical, I didn't have the knowledge of the environment because I couldn't see through the tissue. So I needed a different technology. So that's that upper left-hand part. My knowledge went away. My models were still good, but I couldn't populate them with the right data. The lower right is something like, think of 9/11. Those passengers had perfect knowledge that they were being hijacked, but they didn't have the right mental model. They didn't realize that this hijacking was going to end in a crashing of the plane, so they didn't have the right mental model. So again, autonomy, I've got to push into these other axes, these other places. It won't be where I've pre-programmed in answers to everything that I'm going to experience, okay? So what sort of an agent can generate this imagined representation? Well, what I'm suggesting to you, these agents have multiple representations. Some of them are populated with sensory data, but some of them are imagined. They're confabulated. They're confabulated based on experience, but they're going to be able to handle that unexpected query. It's the only way I can handle the unexpected query is to be able to have these agents which can generate these imagined futures as well as imagined presents. It's my position that your experience as you're looking in the environment is an imagined representation. It's not sensory data. So as I make these agents, remember what I'm going to use them for. I'm going to use them to team with people. Every time I've ever engineered a solution which helps a person make a decision, I've run into this problem. So think of the world being out there to the right somewhere, and I have the computer between the world and the human making the decision, and the computer does some magic on its observables and gives some information to the human, sort of in a unidirectional manner. Every time I've done that, whether it's in target recognition or breast cancer detection, 3 questions come up. These are from Professor Woods at Ohio State. What the heck is your computer doing? Why is it doing that? And what's it going to do when this happens? So for example, in the breast cancer case, first time I took it to a doc and I showed it to them, I showed them the result and they said, why did it call that cancer? So I did my normal professorial thing and I explained to them statistical pattern recognition, and the physician, now remember, he's not a real doc, he doesn't have a PhD, he's an MD, all he says is, that doesn't look like cancer to me. And I had to back up and say, maybe to make human-computer systems correct, I have to have a shared framework. I have to figure out a representation which allows that human and computer to have a common inner predictability of what one gets right and what the other gets right, and which ones they never get right. Just like in my breast cancer problem, docs knew my calc detection system was virtually perfect, but they knew I had issues in the mass area. So they all understood. They could reliably predict, once we correctly designed it, when to use it and how to use it. Well, how does human cognition work? One of the really cool models we've come across for human cognition is what's called a dual process model. It says you have a subconscious and a conscious. And I'm not using those. Remember, I'm an engineer. I'm not using those in some psychiatrist way. I'm trying to find engineering characteristics of the processes you use when you do analysis. All right? At the subconscious level, there's some really interesting calculations that go on. They're not meant to be, I'm not meaning that subconscious is trivial by any means, it's just experience-based. So being an old professor, at the end of every quarter, the student rates you. I haven't taught in 20 years, but in the days when I taught, at the end of the quarter, I was a little nicer, give a little easier homework, maybe bring donuts in for them, okay? And hoping that my ratings would be a little better. Well, it turns out that if you give a student a couple video clips, just a couple seconds long video clips, of the professor giving a lecture, so you took a little video clip of me giving this lecture, no audio is even needed, and let the person rate the professor on how good they are. Let them take the course, and at the end of the course, they'll rate them, and the ratings will be virtually identical. Holy moly, what happened there? What it says is you had in a blink, if you've ever read that book, Blink, in an immediate calculation, you decided the competency of this person doing that task. And you can confabulate a rationalization of why you think that's true. It's the same thing with dating. If you put up a long list of the sort of person you want to date, now I've been married 43 years, I haven't dated for a while, okay? But you put up a long detailed list of the characteristics of the person you want to date, and then I put you in a speed dating environment. You'll pick somebody, and they'll have completely different characteristics, and I'll point it out to you. And what will you say? Oh, there's a chemistry. There's this visceral reaction. What that really is saying to you is at the subconscious level, at the sometimes called the SIST-1 level, you've made a calculation that this is a person you like, and those other characteristics aren't that important to you. Okay, so that's your subconscious. We need agents which have this intuition. And intuition is nothing more than that. It's a bunch of calculations going on below your level of consciousness, and then the result is posted into your consciousness. The intuitive feel is the result of the calculation without the details. Okay? So we need systems with that sort of intuitive-based processing. But then we have to add on top of that something else. We have to add a conscious piece. That's the piece we've been missing. Because engineers like me, when you say consciousness, we glaze over. But what happens if, in fact, there's engineering characteristics of your conscious representation which I can put into my computer? So to understand consciousness, I need to just sort of lean over and slap the person next to you really hard. Okay, if you don't want to do that, just slap your hands together really hard. Just slap your hands together. Now, you feel that tingling? It sort of hurts. Here's the question. Why do you feel that? Now, you can come up with all sorts of, as an engineer, I can give you a million reasons why you want a routine in the system to try to prevent damage, so you want to sense impact, so you want to reduce the damage to the system. Okay, I can tell you why it's useful, but that doesn't answer the question of why does it feel that way? What are the engineering characteristics of your feeling, of the conscious posting of that calculation? That's called a qualy. And so that's why this effort we have called Quest is quality exploitation of sensing technology. It's not just for stuff you feel. It's not for that emotion you have for your daughter because she's important, and the lack of emotion for your sons because they're irrelevant. Okay? It's more than that. It's this representation of your sensory data. When I give you that stimulus, which looks like red patches there, okay, what you're actually seeing consciously is the quality evoked in your consciousness as a result of that stimulus. Those photons of a particular, hue, saturation, and brightness causes you to actually consciously see something. What you're seeing is not out there. It's generated in your mind, okay? Those photons stop when they hit your retina, and you don't consciously see them until they're up on your cortex. There's no photons up there, people. The things you're experiencing, you're generating internally. And what are the characteristics of those, and how do I study those, and how do I put them into systems? Well, the only way to put them in the system is to come up with a set of principles which guide that representation. Remember, what I'm after is that representation of the multiple representations inside my agents. That's what I'm after. These are our characteristics which we think guide the conscious representation. And we'll go through a couple of them here. So for example, everything in your consciousness is situated. It's not data represented. So you can imagine in the GEOINT business, me go capturing the spectral content of some place on the Earth. Now, to most people in my business, that's a wavelength or range of wavelengths, okay? That's a cis1 representation. The left side of this slide is a cis1 representation, where redness is a wavelength or range of wavelengths. In consciousness, wavelengths don't matter. The perceived color, what you actually see consciously, is a concept which only has value with respect to other concepts, like your perception of the blue down below it, okay? That sort of a representation, the manipulation of that sort of a representation gives you completely different answers than one based on the sensory value. And to prove to you that, in fact, you see in this situated space, you can look at an illusion like the color constancy illusion. So in this case, you have a square A and a square B, okay? Those two squares have exactly the same brightness. But at the conscious level, you look at those and you say, bullshit, Captain America, that's not true. You know, B is much lighter than A. But in fact, if we cover up, if we unsituate them, you see that in fact they are the same brightness. Hey, back that up for me 1 second, please. So look here, notice that at the conscious level, you're willing to give up on reality. You're willing to say, I don't care about the absolute brightness. What I care about is how they are situated with respect to each other. And so, if you hit down again now, please, you'll see that the true intensity is hidden from your consciousness. Why are you willing to do that? Why are you willing to give up on reality? Well, the reason is you want to generate this stable, consistent, and useful representation. Another law of the conscious representation is it's a simulation. It's not a posting of data. Okay? That simulation, the best metaphor I have is virtual worlds. We all now have, thank goodness, we have experience with this idea of generating a virtual world. That's what your consciousness is. Your consciousness is an imagined present. When you dream at night, it seems real. And you know you're not getting the sensory data in for that. I contend that's what you're doing right now as you're perceiving the environment. You're generating an imagined representation. And in fact, when you remember something that happened to you, it's really not an AVI file being replayed. It's an imagined past. So I contend your consciousness is this simulated representation of an imagined past, an imagined present, and an imagined future. Most of its content is inferred, not measured. Okay? You have a situationally aware representation. That's your Cis1. Your Cis2 is all about situation consciousness. It's about generating an inferred representation which is stable, consistent, and useful. This is what we're going to need for autonomy. It's a situation conscious representation. So what we're envisioning is in fact this. A set of agents. So on the right side of this diagram, I got these agents. Some of which are computer agents. They have Cis1s and Cis2s, an intuitive system and a deliberative conscious system. And you have humans. They have a Cis1 and a Cis2. And because they have similar architectures, I contend the humans will be able to better align to them. Now, out there in the battle space, I have something I've got to capture and figure out what's going on. That's GEOINT 101. For the first time, I'll get out of the empirical business. GEOINT will no longer be empirical, because I'm going to have a set of mathematics which says the situational complexity in that battle space can be represented by a set of math. The situational representational capacity of that set of humans and computers can be captured, and I can tell you whether one can handle the other. That's what I'm after, is that theory. Now, remember why I went down this path. Why do we require autonomy? To get to the future I need to get to in ISR, people list these characteristics all the time. You have systems that are aware. You have systems that can do this or that. They have a theory of mind. They understand what you need. To achieve this, I contend you need these sort of situation-conscious solutions, okay? And so remember, the walk away from this piece of the talk is autonomy. Don't just think of it in terms of the amount of intelligence in it. You got to think of it along these three axes. The command and control relationship, what task you're talking about, and this last piece is the computational complexity, which I contend requires situation consciousness. Having a maximally situation-aware agent isn't enough. Measuring the entire world and putting it internal to the computer is never going to solve your problem. What you have to do is figure out how to generate a representation which allows you to generate, in fact, a minimal awareness, a stable, consistent, and useful representation which you can deliberate over. Completely different goal than maximally situation aware. All right? And then this quest effort is about doing that, making these agents which have this intuitive system, that's subconscious, and the conscious system together blended, and this set of math which is going to allow me to solve them. Okay, we're almost home now. So I started out the talk by saying, Sensing as a Service is a vision for the future. It says you guys are going to get out of the business of generating a product for a person doing a task. You're going to be interacting with a whole bunch of collection sources, intelligence at its max, generate an information repository which multiple users can use for reasons you have no idea. Okay, that's a Sensing as a Service idea. Then to do that, I'm going to wrap you around. I'm going to give you this cognitive exoskeleton, which is going to have a Sys1 and Sys2 like you, and it's going to allow you to generate that information sphere. Now, once you do that, as you do that, you're going to bring your answer to somebody like the Pentagon, and you can say, hey, we've got an answer for you, and that's going to be a cold call, because you're going to know somebody who has a general officer friend, and you're going to knock on their door. And when they do that, they're going to call us, and they're going to say, is this real or is it not? That's why I have to talk to you about PC-PAD-X, all right? PC-PAD-X was, in fact, came out of a 2011 Scientific Advisory Board study where we said, how do you handle that deluge of data? How do you handle those cold calls? And so we stood up what's called PC-PAD Experimental, and for those of you who can't read that bottom line there, PC-PAD comes from the Air Force Global Integrated ISR Doctrine, and it covers everything from planning what you need to go get all the way to dissemination of products. And we added the X on the end to mean experimental. So we've set internal to the Air Force Research Laboratory this distributed laboratory environment where we have real data, real analysts, and real R&D. There's 3 fundamental pieces of PC-PAD-X. We actually do R&D development, but everything we do, we bring in real human analysts, so it's human-centered design and analysis, and then we always objectively assess it with a separate set of assessors. So let's work our way through these 3 pieces just quickly. The user analysis part of this effort is really just fascinating to watch. Quite often when people try to figure out where I can bring value with a particular tool or whether a particular tool is important or not, you'll go out and interview somebody. Yeah, you can get so far by doing that. What we actually do is we embed people with our analysts doing tasks, and then they have a whole series of very precise and complex methods they use to extract what's necessary to improve the capability, and we do this. So that user analysis and user-centered design is one of the legs to PC-PAD-X. The second is, and this one I want to make sure you understand, is objective assessment. Not only do we objectively assess what we do, but when you have a capability, we have an outward-facing part of PC-PAD-X. You can go online and we have data sets you can try your tracker on, for example. Let's say you develop a tracker. We regularly keep this survey of what's out there in the environment, at what level of maturity it is, so when people call us up, we know. And so we're always happy to engage with you if you want to send us information about what you're doing in a particular area, and we put it into this searchable database so that people can get at. And we also run these, what are called plug-fest in the plug-and-play sense. We don't want you to have to generate an entire distributed common ground station environment to test your tool. We want to allow you to bring your little piece of technology in and try it in the context without having all that overhead. And so there's those things regularly go on which you can participate in. And then the last piece is this sort of technology development. The technology development area is we do things. We actually develop visualization environments. We add tools in it. Now we actually did this PC-PAD-X effort to that problem I told you about earlier. So here you have a problem where you have a bunch of people being tasked to generate intelligence products from streaming video. How do you apply this process to that task? And you'll never be able to read this. I apologize. But in essence, what we did is we list all the tasks that they currently do. We then figured out where is technology mature enough to help them. And when you break apart all the pieces people are doing, from capturing what's going on to figuring out what it means and then actually generating a product and disseminating it, figuring out where technology is mature enough to actually insert, you can sort of change the roles around, reduce the number of people, and put technology where it belongs, appropriately interface with the right process. And so that's what PC-PAD-X does or has done. We're now standing up an effort to do the same thing in a contested degraded ops environment. We call that RICE. RICE is Revolutionizing ISR for Contested Environments. And it will follow these set of themes, which I've listed there in the middle, the sensing as a service theme, for example. So that's PCPAD-X. All right. Here's the trajectory we went through. Sensing as a service is a vision. It says, get out of the business of this linear relationship. Generate an information repository, solve lots of people's problems, because the number of sensors is growing, the number of users is growing. I can't keep growing the amount of analysis. I got to figure out some better way to scale that. If we're going to get to that, I need to give you cognitive exoskeletons. That's where Quest comes in. I think autonomy will play there. I don't believe increasing computational power or slight improvements in algorithms are going to solve the autonomy problem. Quest is the way we're going about it. And then we have the PCPAD-X effort, which says even as you develop these technologies, figure out how to put users with real data with these technologies together to demonstrate that, in fact, they achieve some mission capability. All right. I did that on time and on budget so I can answer questions. Any questions? And please go to a microphone if you have a question. Any questions? You don't have to answer. I'm going to hang around during the break. You can come up afterwards. I'm sorry. Oh, I can't read. I don't have glasses on me. You have to have somebody say them in. I apologize. Yeah.
Thanks. Patrick Tucker with Defense One. I wonder if you could, this has been a really great and wide-spanning talk. I wonder if you could briefly address something very specific you had up there, a little bit of a description of some of the challenges of automating data analysis for RPA pilots. And right now our country is facing a huge capability shortage in terms of how many pilots and analysts and sensor operators we have versus the challenge that's in front of them. What aspect of that job can be automated more quickly? And when can that begin to affect this shortage that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, great question. And I'll just remind you, the PCPAD-X effort, which we stood up, was in that document, which again is on the line. It's called the Sensor Data Exploitation Study. In the Sensor Data Exploitation Study, we actually used that particular problem as a way to drive home how you can match technology to problem spaces. And in doing that, we defined roles and responsibilities of all the people in that chain. And so in the RPA, in the remotely piloted aircraft solution space, I don't know if you know this, for what we used to call a combat air patrol, one 24-hour mission over some region of interest, it costs me, the United States Air Force, 150 odd humans. And some of that is for maintenance, some of it is for processing, some of it's for the ground control station. It's enormously human. The human tail on that is enormous, and it's very difficult. Now, if I just sort of restrict that down just to the exploitation piece, trying to get information, this sort of GEOINT sort of piece, generating intel products from that streaming data, we actually have several reports I can provide you where we looked at all the pieces. So you can imagine a ground control station, which is actually flying the aircraft. You have sensor operators. Every place along that way, those humans that are involved can bring information to bear on generating the products and making the products more universally useful. And so what we did is we analyzed that entire process, figuring out every place we could put technology where it would help. And we're actually fielding that in a couple of DGS environments right now. We not only developed it, we actually objectively assessed it and demonstrated that it improved mission capability. So I can give you that information if you just drop me a note. And we have that one really, really wrung out. If you have ideas on a similar sort of approach for contested environments, I'd love to hear it, by the way. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the uncertainty and situational context and the associated predictive outcomes? Humans are comfortable with uncertainty while computers are not. How do we know when to bring humans into the loop where they are better than computers?
Yeah, this whole idea of this impedance matching between humans and computers is a problem. And uncertainty is a great example. And when most people talk about computers don't like uncertainty, it's because they have a model of computers' representation as things like an ontology or taxonomy. And absolutely true, if you get uncertainty into those things, they all fall apart. But there are more modern approaches to those representations, and I gave you my view of that today, where uncertainty is not, in fact, a problem anymore. In fact, you want to exploit that because, in fact, the what's called bad data, the data that's conflicting, in fact, gives you information about how you should be inferring stuff versus using measurements. So I have a very high confidence that statement in terms of computers can handle uncertainty, that's going by the wayside, okay? And it's due to a lot of great hard work. But the more important problem, which is asking that question, is the matching of human computers. That's always the big challenge. It is not something where you just say, oh, I see what they're doing, I'm going to add a tool in there. It takes that PC Pad X sort of effort where you bring real humans with real computers, with real data all together, and you work at that problem space until you get it just right.
In terms of RPA ISR, what tasks will be automated first? What are the automation and autonomy challenges specific to that task?
Yeah, again, as I mentioned to the previous question, there's some very specific tasks which we turned out to be very good. Auto generation of products. You might have looked at that technology. We're getting better and better at product generation automation. Tracking, we're here and there, depending upon the environment. Okay, that's going to keep going. That's going to keep improving. Target recognition, I have job security. We've thrown billions of dollars at that, and we don't have it yet. But there are some things that with certain types of targets and certain types of environments, we're okay on. So that's going to. There'll be cases where we can help people doing that. So there'll be this again. Keep in mind my taxonomy on autonomy. There'll be very specific tasks. Tracking, specific target set, a target deck sort of view of ATR. There'll be some very specific tasks which we're going to roll in, and we are rolling in right now.
Is AFRL collecting data with known correct results of past analyses to test capabilities in PC Pad X in addition to user analysis?
Yeah, we actually do both. We have functional assessment where we have a bunch of truth and we just turn tools loose. And we do, this is how we cut our teeth in assessment. The guy who leads that effort is a guy named Dr. Kyle Erickson, and I can put you in contact with him. But we have data sets, we have large repositories where we keep benchmarks. Here's how accurate you can track. Here's how accurate you can identify. And those are publicly available quite often.
How does Air Force DCGS need to be modified to take more or maximum advantage of a human's ability to use automation now and in the future?
Yeah, that effort is being looked at right now by the A2. There's a very robust addressing of the future of that weapon system. We actually addressed it in the sensor data exploitation study. So if you want our view as of 2011 on how we thought the DCGS should change, that is publicly available. They talked about architecture and humans, how we integrate them together, and that's publicly available. It's an easy way to get to that answer.
And this will be our last question. Autonomy equals morality? Question mark. What are you doing to address this?
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. The challenges are so immense, and the state of the art is so minuscule, that it's just it's not even worth discussing. People who worry about those sort of statements which are thrown out there by Bill Gates and Elon Musk and them. They're certainly not in my business, because if you look at even the most recent DARPA challenges, we're way down in here. I'm not a singularity warrior guy. So anyway, I'll be around during the break if you have any questions.
I'd like to thank Dr. Steve Rogers for this presentation, this keynote talk.